Okay, we're going to talk about 3030 this afternoon. I'm sure you all know this has been a controversial topic within agricultural circles, also within the state of Nebraska. So we're just going to kind of plow through this. What did the president say? What did the 3030 report say? And what's going to happen after that? And it's a very interesting story. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than I ordinarily would, because 3030 has been so controversial and because there are so many different things that are being alleged about it. So I want to go through it so that you get some idea of the intended scope of 3030 and realize that it's perhaps a little broader than some of us might have thought. Okay, so we start with the president's climate policy executive order. And executive orders, I believe they go back to George Washington, but it's where the president or the governor of the state, Governor Ricketts has done a state executive order on 3030, but it's basically saying to government agencies, this is what my policy objectives are for this program, and this is how I want you to administer the program to accomplish those policy objectives. Now, executive orders do not authorize the president or the governor to change any of the laws. They can't do that unilaterally. They have to go through the regular legislative process for that. But it is, it sends a message, and that's basically what they are designed to do. And that's generally what they're used for, is they want to send a message both to agencies, but also to the people of the United States. So the climate executive order is number 14,008. They, again, go back a long ways. And it deals with a wide range of climate issues. We're going to focus on section 216 in this, and it's a 22-page single-spaced document, so there's a lot of stuff in it. But paragraph 216 is called or labeled "Conserving Our Nation's Land and Waters." And what 216 subsection A says that these four agencies, the Department of the Interior, USDA, the Commerce Department, and the Council of Environmental Quality, which is a small White House agency that basically coordinates environmental programs for the federal government. They will prepare a report recommending steps, and the stuff that's in quotes is pretty much taken verbatim from these various documents, recommending steps that the U.S. should take working with state, local, tribal, territorial governments, agriculture and forest landowners, that's us, fishermen and other key stakeholders, to achieve the goal of conserving at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. And this is from the January 27 executive order. And for the agencies, the Interior Departments, it's got Bureau of Land Management. It's got most of the federal land is managed by the Interior Department. USDA, of course, we've got the Forest Service, and then NRCS. And the Commerce Department has NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So they're the coastal areas. So Commerce is kind of the water agency, and the Interior and Ag are the two land agencies in this program. Okay, so the report is proposed guidelines for determining whether lands and waters qualify for conservation. And throughout this, we talk about conservation. A lot of times the political debate over 3030 makes it sound like preservation, but it's not preservation. And there's, the White House for sure understands that conservation and preservation, are not the same thing. Okay, so what lands and waters qualify for conservation, and establish mechanisms to measure progress towards the 30% goal. And I believe that Ryan will have a PDF of the slides sometime after this, when this goes up on the web. So if you want to, you can take a look, take a look at the slides again and print them out even if you want to. Now, very interestingly, the other half of 3030 is what is going to be a sister program, probably section 216 sub B. And this is climate smart agriculture. And you've all probably heard about the climate smart agriculture report that USDA issued, about the same time as the 3030 report came out. And this relates directly to carbon, ag carbon credits and all that. And the language that I have highlighted, they want USDA to encourage adoption and voluntary adoption of climate smart ag and forestry practices and result in additional measurable and verifiable carbon reductions and sequestration. So, carbon credits is a different topic that we've talked about before, and we'll talk about again in the future, but I'm just throwing it out there that this is kind of, this is in the same executive order that 3030 is in, and actually is in the same section. Okay, this is just a cover of the 3030 report. And so you got the two little guys, looks like they're planting a tree, but very cute. So they're going for all the political pluses that they can get. Again, we know what the agencies are, and here's all the acronyms, but again, Interior is the Bureau of Land Management, the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, so we know about them on endangered species in the Platte, for sure. And then the U.S. Geological Survey. Those are the agencies within Interior. Then USDA, Forest Service, then RCS, and then NOAA, then the Commerce Department, then CQ. Now, they came with 8 overarching principles in terms of trying to accomplish the 3030 goal. And a lot of this, most of this I would skip, except that 3030 is so controversial that I feel obliged to at least briefly touch on all of these things so that you see that, this isn't the land grab, at least perhaps that has been talked about a lot in the press, that it's broader than that. And, we'll see what it is. And then a lot of it is, kind of political stuff that you have to say, we're going to collaborate and we're going to cooperate, and all that sort of stuff. So that's collaborate and be inclusive. That's the first one. Conserve land and water for the benefit of everybody. Okay, that's good. Support locally led and designed conservation. Fine. Work with the tribes and support their conservation efforts and priorities. That's great. And then, the next one, it looks like, is the Civilian Climate Corps. Get a job dimension into this in terms of conservation and restoration for land and water. And so that, that sounds like the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, number 6 is, could come from a Republican 3030 program if we had one. And it's honor private property rights and support voluntary stewardship efforts of private landowners and fishers. Okay, that, that's no land grab there. Number 7, use science as a guide. That actually is important in one of these facets, as we'll get to towards the end. Build on existing tools and programs and strategies, and then come up with measurement program. And 2 parts of that. Come up with a basic inventory of conserved lands in the United States, and that's what we're going to spend most of this talking about, to see what do we know about what's formerly been identified as conserved or protected. And the groups that will do that will USGS will be the lead agency, NRCS, from ag, and then NOAA, again for the coastal waters, not the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's a very interesting choice, but that's a signal as well. And then do annual program updates, including one by the end of this year. So whether that happens or not remains to be seen. Depends on whether the funding is there for that. But again, that's what the report says. The Atlas should provide this baseline assessment of how much land and waters are being currently conserved, not preserved, conserved or restored, and including the contributions of farmers, ranchers, forest owners, through effective and voluntary conservation measures. I'm leaving out the water part because they agree that there are 28%, 27 or 28% of water is conserved right now. So they're not really worried about water. But they also want the atlas to identify existing protections and designations on lands and waters across, all the land in the United States, all the land and waters in the United States. Okay, then they have 6 early action focus recommendations. And the first one, I think there's a reason it's number 1, because it's probably the one that the president is most likely to, put some chips on, and that's create more parks and safe outdoor recreation opportunities in nature deprived communities. So urban parks. And I suspect that that's not just going to be for large cities. If they do an urban park program, which is the one that that's the one program that I would expect to come out of 3030, no matter what else happens. I think they're going to make that open to communities everywhere. So it's not going to be just New York City or Kansas City or Chicago or whatever. It's going to be, Homer, Nebraska, small communities throughout the country are going to have probably going to have a chance to that too, would be my bet. Okay, number 2, support tribally led conservation programs. That's kind of repetitive, but that's fine. 3, expand collaborative conservation of fish and wildlife habitats and corridors. When they talk about corridors in terms of habitat, they're talking about connecting them. So they've got some that are protected, but they want to get a corridor between, habitat A and habitat B, and they want to get a corridor so that they can link them. And that usually involves additional land. So that dimension of it is something where they're going to look at voluntary, in my opinion, voluntary land purchase or conservation easements to establish these corridors if they indeed pursue that as a program. Increased public access for outdoor recreation, and this looks like it's targeted on federal lands, but there might be some encouragement for state and local as well. And then incentivize and reward voluntary conservation efforts of farmers, ranchers, and forest owners, which again is repetitive. And then the last one is the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, here are the messages, and I'm not involved in ag production personally, so I understand that producers may have a different take on this, but my take on it is, I believe they will respect private property rights, basically because they have to. And we can argue about, well, what does respecting private property rights mean? But in a legal sense, they can't take your land away from you. And we'll go through all that in a little bit. But, so I'm not, that's not anything I'm particularly worried about. Working through existing programs with additional funding. This third one, they're giving NRCS kind of a high priority and making them one of the lead agencies with regards to developing this conservation atlas that says, what's the land that we already have conserved? I think that's really important. NRC, there are a lot of NRCS programs that could count towards land conservation, and especially since it's tied to climate change and trying to reduce carbon emissions, I think that really broadens it. So clearly, traditional programs like CRP and the Wetland Reserve Program, that's clearly going to count. Even the wildlife people will say that counts. But then, riparian buffers, yeah, I think they would count. Carbon sequestration, this is a climate program. It's supposed to be a climate program, so that's going to count. So I think that there's going to be, a lot more stuff that's going to count than if you left it up to the wildlife biologists who are not on this team that developed this atlas, they would not count them. But so it's a broader vision of land conservation than just wildlife habitat. And so that's my own take on it, but I think that's probably a decent kind of political take on it. Then the last one, that there is, I don't want to downplay that. Especially if the wildlife folks get their way, they will try to link, some of these habitat regions and stuff like that. So they'll be looking at, as a minimum, easements, land acquisition. I don't think they'll go all the way to condemnation. I don't think they will. Okay. Some big unanswered question. What's going to count towards the 30%? We don't know, but we'll explore that, basically in the rest of the talk. Will each state be required to conserve 30%? Nothing in the executive order or the 3030 report even imply that. However, 3030 has been in the works for at least 10 years. And some of the voices in this history of 3030 do think that 30% of every state should have conservation. So, when Governor Ricketts said, requiring 30% of Nebraska to be, quote, conserved, could be a real not good thing for Nebraska agriculture. That's not a ridiculous thing to say. If the wildlife folks get to drive this thing, I mean, they could head down that road. But I don't think that that's where the president wants to go. And I don't think, looking at how the conservation atlas is set up, I don't think they're going down that road either. So, but that is an issue that's out there, and I think it's fair. And I think it's not unreasonable to bring it up. It's not being a clever, disinformation strategy. There's actually something there. Now, if they stay true to their overarching principles and they say this is going to be science-based, it's very unlikely that we need 30% from every state to get to 30% for the country. And if we want the 30% of the best habitat in that, it's not going to be 30% from every state. It can't be, because some states are going to have less good habitat than other states. That's just the way it is. So it's, there are going to be some states where it's going to be a lot less than 30%, and Nebraska is probably one of those states. Now, will the federal government use condemnation to go after the really great habitat? I don't think so, but it's not, it's a fair question. There are a lot of groups who think that, wildlife groups or environmental groups who would say, yeah, if that's what it takes, then that's what we should do. But I don't think it'll ever get that far. But it's something, you can't ignore it. You have to keep an eye on it. Okay, let's talk briefly about budget realities, because you can have all the program proposals in the world, and if you don't have money to fund them with, that program isn't going to go anywhere. I think we can all agree that President Biden is not going to get all the budget that he wants for climate and related programs, including 3030. I mean, he's already come down from his initial budget proposal, and nothing has gotten through Congress yet. And when it comes out through Congress, it's probably going to be less than he originally proposed, what he's come down to since then. So, as the budget keeps getting smaller, there's fewer things that will be able to get done. And if you're looking at the climate stuff, I believe that the president's top climate objective is to reduce carbon emissions within the United States. That's his number one climate objective. 3030 doesn't move the needle very much on that. There's a lot of, electricity stuff, a lot of transportation stuff, a lot of industrial emission stuff that would move the needle way more than 3030 could do, even if you had 3030 on steroids. So, 3030 is really, in my opinion, is something that was tossed out to the environmental groups to say, the environmental groups understand, we're going to have increased spending in all likelihood on climate related programs. Let's try to keep it so that the president doesn't, steal money from habitat programs to put it into clean energy and stuff like that. Let's try to make the case that habitat is important and that we can't forget about habitat while we're doing all this climate stuff. And if we do, if we can peel off some of this climate money for habitat, so much the better. And so I think that's probably where 30-30 has come from. And I look at it very much in that kind of context. I don't think it's a top issue for the president by any means. I think he's, keeping some environmental folks in Congress and, in non-governmental organizations, keeping them happy, saying, yes, we're not going to forget about habitat, but we got to get this climate stuff done too. I really think it is that kind of a deal. So what do I think when President Biden and the White House get their funding from Congress? What are they going to spend it on? They're going to spend it on clean energy. They're going to spend it on carbon sequestration technology. And I'm not talking about on the farm. I'm talking about, liquefying the emissions from coal-fired power plants and then storing that underground. That's what carbon sequestration means outside of the ag context. And that's, and the environmental groups are all against that because they say it encourages more coal use. But looking at it realistically, China and India, who are going to be two of the largest emitters over time, China already is the largest emitter, although the U.S. is the largest cumulative historical emitter over time. They're going to keep burning coal because it's what they have. And they can build all the solar and wind and stuff, but they're going to have plenty of coal as well. And so if we can help develop the so-called clean coal technology, that's going to be good for everybody. Batteries, transportation, improving the grid, developing a super grid. Those all move. Each one of those moves the needle on reducing carbon emissions in the United States. Urban parks doesn't move the needle, but I think it's it's a constituency that the president wants to do something for. So he's going to do that if he can. Civilian Conservation Corps, reforestation with all these wildfires and stuff. You can see a role for that, a need for that. 30-30, I put them down at 25. That may be too high. But if it on his 50 things that he would do, I don't know if 30-30 would be as high as 25. But I just want to show that there's a real gap that in terms of where I think the money is going to go. And, you would think that 30-30 was the most important federal program that was under consideration for anything, if you reading the newspapers. Okay, what counts towards 30% land conservation? One of the things that really frustrated me about the 30-30 report is that the word acre never appears. Now, they just talk about percents. And, so I had to scramble around and try to figure out what's the accepted number for how many acres in the United States and stuff. The USDA says 2.27 billion acres. And they know a lot more about it than I do. So I'm going to take it from them and say that that's it. And what's the distribution? Well, the biggest category is grassland, pasture and range. Forest is right behind it. Cropland is in third place, but there you're over 60% of the total, probably close to 70%. Then parks and wildlife, then wetlands, tundra, unproductive woodlands. So if I'm designing the 2020 program and I understand that I don't have all the money in the world, I'm going to have to spend the money. I'm going to have a limited amount of money, a lot less than I want to try to accomplish this. Where am I going to go? Well, I'm going to go into grasslands. I'm going to go into forests. I'm going to go into parks. I'm going to go into wetlands and tundra and unproductive woodlands. They're going to be the cheapest place for me to pick up land to be conserved, or to land, protecting wetlands as wetlands. That counts as land conservation. So that's what I would do. And croplands are not going to be real high on the list unless we're looking perhaps at carbon sequestration. Now, and I just threw the ownership in. That's harder to run down. But most of it's private, but quite a bit of it is federal. Now, 30% is how many acres? Okay, that's 681 million acres. The 3030 report says 12% is protected, so that's 272. Hoping my calculator is good. So, that's over 400 million acres to go to get to 30%, twice the size of the state of Texas. Well, that's what the 3030 report said, were 12%. And that comes from a 2009 USGS report called A Map for the Future. And it says that 12% is in GAP categories 1 and 2 out of 4 categories. And these are the very highly protected and highly protected lands. But that excludes 18%, an additional 18%, which if you added 12%, that gives you 30. GAP 3 is multiple use protected land. And we'll go into all this in a little bit more detail in just a second. The same report says that there's at least 715 million acres of protected land. This is as of 2009, held by state, local, and non-federal agencies. Does not include conservation easements, which is another 65 million acres probably, and then trust lands held in trust for Native American tribes. That's another 56 million. So there's another 120 acres on top of that. So you're 840 million acres of land that's officially protected. And, we're looking at getting to 681. So there's the point I'm trying to make is there's an awful lot of land that is officially protected. And the issue is, is it protected enough to make the 3030 program managers happy? That's basically what it comes down to. Okay, this is just a map, and this is from this protected areas database of the United States, and that's from the USGS. That's why it's really important that they're leading this atlas, because they're going to draw on this database work that they've been doing, and that they're trying to get funding for. But see that most of it's in the West, and I guess that's where a lot of the BLM and Forest Service land is. So that's not a big surprise. Okay, these are the 4 categories. GAP 1 is land that is in a natural state and that is legally required to remain in a natural state. GAP 2 is where it's in a natural state, primarily a natural state, and it's required to stay in a primarily natural state, but there are some exceptions. GAP 3, which if all of GAP 3 were in GAP 1 or GAP 2, we would be at 30%. Mostly permanently protected, but some areas are subject to extractive use. That's oil and gas exploration and development. That's timber harvesting, and both of those take place on BLM land and Forest Service land. And then the last part of GAP 3 is that all federally endangered species land, any habitat for them is locked down, throughout these areas. And so I read a very interesting article about 3030 where they were talking to somebody who was an administrator for this protected land database program within USGS. And he said, what we could do if we had the funding is that we could go into this gap 3 land, mark off the areas where there is current resource extraction. That is, whether there's the oil and gas activity or whether there's the timber mining activity, put maybe a little buffer around that and categorize that as gap 3A, for example. And then all the rest of that Forest Service or BLM land that's in this, particular chunk, we could analyze to see whether it's gap 1 or gap 2 and reclassify it. And, so hopefully that is what they will be doing in this, in the atlas that they develop. They will be taking a look at that. But again, it all depends on funding. If they get the funding to do it, they'll do it. If they don't get the funding, it's probably not going to happen, or it's not going to happen very quickly. Then gap 4, which is a lot of land, is, basically they're saying it's either in an unnatural land cover like row crop production, or, management intent is unknown. And so we don't know what we don't know about this land. We don't know if it's any good for habitat or not. We just don't know. And this, this pie chart shows, this is all the land in the United States. And so you got 70% that's gap 4. Then gap 1, 2, and 3 is basically the remaining 30%. And the gap 3 is the very interesting part, because a significant portion of that could be moved into gap 2 or gap 1. With this analysis that the USGS said that they'd be thrilled to perform if anybody would give them the money to do it. And 3030 kind of gives them the mandate to do it, but if the funding is there, then it'll get done. If not, it won't happen. And the tribal lands, the conservation easements, another 100+ million acres of potentially gap 1 or gap 2 category land is out there as part of the 70%. It's part of the 70% because it's not in the database. So, they've admitted that there's more protected land outside of the database that they just haven't been able to nail down yet, basically because of funding shortages. Okay, so 715 million acres which is over 30%, is already classified as protected land. It's already protected. It doesn't include, another 25 million acres that is also probably largely protected. And so they need to analyze that to see how much is there really that is protected. And to me, the bottom line is that we're a lot closer to 30% being protected already than the 12% cited in this report would suggest. Okay, I'm going to get a quick drink here and then. Now, as I mentioned earlier, is the issue, does each state need to have 30%? Well, that would be tough. I mean, that would be expensive. And I mean, if they decide that, yeah, we need 30% from every state, they can forget about global warming because, they're going to be spending all the money on habitat, which makes absolutely no sense. But this which comes from a useful report on the 3030, but it's one that was written before the Biden 3030 stuff came out. This is just shows the distribution of where's the habitat that's been currently identified, and there's some states on the left-hand side, starting with Alaska. There's quite a bit of habitat. Then you move down at the bottom, 60%. Not as much. And there's, if you look at how many states are 10% or more of gap 1, 2, and 3, and then that's 26 states. So about half the states are under 10% now, and But again, if they follow the science, then they're going to go to where the best habitat is, and that's it's not going to be statewide, that 30% in every state. Okay, now let's talk about property rights for just a little bit. The first one is confiscation, and to me, as a lawyer, when somebody says land grab, confiscation is what comes to mind. And confiscation is when the government takes your property, your land, but doesn't pay you a nickel for it. And this was legal in England, for, I don't know, 600 or so years, when all the land belonged to the king. And if the king wanted it and decided the king didn't want you to have it anymore, they just kick you off, and the king could give the land to somebody else. And this changed at some point in time. I'm not sure when. English law is a real bramble. I mean, it's a real thicket. It's I can't make heads or tails of it on a good day. But anyway, that was the legal tradition in England for a long, long time. That has never been the law in the United States. The Fifth Amendment in the Constitution says government can't take your property without due process of law, which means without just compensation. And that's fair market value. And I understand that people who, if had land condemned for a highway or something like that, it's really, I mean, it's in part about the money, but it's also in part about, they took your land, and yeah, you may have gotten a big check, but they still took your land, and you're never going to get that land back. And, if you didn't want to sell it, then even though in legal terms it's not confiscation, it feels like that. It feels like they stole the land from you, even though they paid you the money. You probably had to pay property, or you had to pay taxes on that, what you got, and all of that. But anyway, you're not happy about it, and it sure feels like they stole it from you. And so, 30/30, it's clearly, it's not going to be confiscation, but if they end up condemning property, which I couldn't believe it. I would be very, very surprised. I'd say a less than 1% chance of that ever happening. But if it did happen, whoever got their land condemned, they'd be very, very angry and very, very upset. Doesn't matter how big the check is, they're going to be very angry, very upset, no matter what. And nobody could blame them for that. Nobody could blame them for that. Now, in my opinion, it's going to be all voluntary. It'll be easements. And if it's property that they want, they've got this, you guys know more about this than I do. They've got the scoring system for how valuable land is for whatever conservation objective they have. But if they say, boy, this is great habitat, so it gets the maximum value for habitat protection or whatever the category is, then, you're going to be able to bid in a higher bid for conservation easement on that through or something like CRP, for that, and you'd have a good chance of getting that paid for. But that's how I think it's going to work. If they acquire any additional land, they're not going to. If they purchase land, it's going to be a voluntary purchase, not condemnation. It's more likely to be something like conservation easements, and but there's at least a 50-50 chance that it'll never get that far, or if they do, it'll be at a very small level. It'll be a little add-on to USDA programs, but no big deal that they're spending a lot of money on. Okay, in conclusion, and I've kind of zoomed through this, but I wanted to leave time for questions because I thought that there would likely be questions on this. I really think 30/30 is going to end up getting lost in the shuffle on climate policy and resource policy. I really think that this was something that the Biden administration gave to the the habitat hawks or the habitat groups, they want to say, we want to be part of, you've got this bigger environmental pot to spend money for on climate. We want to get some of that money spent on us. The climate pot is not going to be as big as to address all the climate ambitions that the president has. And so, 30/30 is going to be down towards the bottom of the deck in terms of funding priorities on this. And, so if they don't get much money to do it, then they're not going to do much. Now, we'll have some early indications of this. That they're supposed to come out. We'll see what kind of progress they make with the conservation atlas, which I see as being very, very important, because the atlas will be the process where we move from 12% being protected to 25, 26, 27% protected, in my opinion. So that atlas is really important. And in addition, they say they want an annual update on 30/30 by the end of 2021 for the first one. So they want, they want a progress report on this thing by the end of the year. And if there is a progress report, and if it shows that they're making progress, then maybe this is a program that will go somewhere. But what those two things look like, the conservation atlas, and I don't see how they can possibly have that done by the end of the year. I think that's, if it was the end of next year, that would be kind of miraculous. But in terms of where they're going with that and what they're doing with it, and the funding they get to do it, so they have a halfway decent chance of doing it correctly, then that would be say that, well, maybe there is going to be a 30/30 program after all. Now, I'm not saying that agriculture should ignore 30/30. That's the wrong message. I'm saying I would not let 30/30 keep me awake at night. I would hope that my national, whether it's National Corn Growers or National Farm Bureau or National Cattlemen, whoever it is, I would hope that they would be tracking this thing in Washington. But it would not be, as a producer, it would not be that high on my. It would not be that high on the things I would worry about. You got plenty to worry about with prices and weather and everything else. So you don't need to worry about this unless it's your diet strategy. The more you worry, the more weight you lose or something, and then go ahead, then go for it. Now the biggest exception would be grazing land. The BLM grazing land, I would, if I were, in New Mexico or wherever, and had rented several, or a few thousand acres of BLM grazing land or something, I would be a little worried, because that's one of the articles I saw said, well, all they need to do is to get to 30% would be to go take all this category 3 land and just say that, habitat is the top priority. You'd have to rewrite some laws in Congress to accomplish that. You can't do that administratively, so it's not likely to happen in a closely divided Congress. But if there's anybody that has a real threat to worry about, then I would say it was the BLM grazing land. That they have some. Their risk exposure is probably higher than anybody else. For everybody else, it's, they may have some easement opportunities or some conservation program opportunities that weren't there before, but I don't see that as a big risk exposure. Okay, I guess that will do it for me, and so I will stop sharing my screen and we can go to the question and answer portion.
All right, Dave, thanks so much for the presentation and for taking the time to get to know the subject matter and giving us your opinion on it. One of the questions, I think it was sort of answered throughout your presentation, but at the beginning, Question was, correct me if I'm wrong, but 30 by 30 was something envisioned by conservation groups before the election. It is the America the Beautiful Act or something like that. Those in favor of the concept should call it the proper name, not the moniker that antis like to use.
Well, the first, I agree. If that's a statement, I'll agree with the 90%. I'm going to call it 30-30 because that's shorter than America the Beautiful, or conserving and restoring America the Beautiful, which is quite a mouthful. And I don't apologize for calling it 30-30 because that's what it is in the press. And that's how most people are going to associate it. However, you're right. Some states have passed a 30-30 type program, or where they're trying to accomplish this within their own states. And this is something that conservation groups have been concerned about it, like as Larry suggested, going back at least 10 years. So this has been brewing, so to speak, for a long time. There have been 30-30 type bills introduced in Congress, and for going back several years. So this did not stop with this did not begin with Biden. Rather, this was a reaction to the groups that are supportive of the 30-30 type program.
Dave, back when you were talking about funding this and the probability of a 30 by 30 being funded, a comment came in, look at section 206, government buying power.
Yes, that talks about the government entering through its government contracting program to encourage lower carbon purchasing programs. So that's, I don't think that's my superficial and off the cuff quick recollection of that section. I don't think section 6 would authorize purchasing land for habitat.
All right. Another comment question came in. Who is paying taxes on the 715 million acres?
Well, it depends on how much of that is federal, and a good chunk of it is federal, I would guess. Well, let me back up a little bit more. If you're a geographical information system person, if you know how to work with those databases, you can go online, just Google PAD-US, and it'll take you to that USGS site where all this information is. And they've got the databases online. So if you want to query the databases, and I can say that, but I can't tell anybody what that means. But if you want to query the databases, you can find out all of this stuff in a lot of detail. There is one of the frustrating things is that there's very little descriptive information about what's in the database and that. I pulled almost every word of descriptive information from that 2009 report and put it in my overheads because there's not very much. And so that's, so they're not interested in describing protected areas in the United States so much as they are interested, at least in these reports that I had, they're interested in trying to convince the federal government and private non-governmental organizations to financially support that process so that they can go in and clean up what's in category 3 and stuff like that.
All right. Another question, Dave, would you comment on the UN plan for 50% by 2050?
I think that's just, and this is just my off the cuff. I don't know anything specific about that proposal. However, I think that's like just like 30-30 in terms of the overall Biden climate agenda. You know, it's on the laundry list of things because there were people who made enough noise to get it on the list, but it's not going to be very high on the list. You know, you look at most of the countries in the world, countries in Africa, maybe some of the countries in the Middle East, you know, some of the countries in Latin America, they're very poor. You know, they have more basic needs, clean water, you know, ample food supplies, stuff like that, you know, electrification. They have a lot of things that they need, in my opinion, more than habitat. So I think that that's, you know, that's there on political reasons, but it's not a, I doubt that it's a high funding priority anywhere.
Good. Two questions, Dave, that are somewhat related. First is, what is the difference between conservation and preservation? And the second question, until conservation is defined by the Biden administration, how can we know what lands will be targeted?
Okay, that's a fair question. And they don't come right out and say, this is what we mean by conservation. But preservation is where you say, we're going to set this aside and we're going to say, if it's a forest, we're going to manage this forest for old forest growth. So we're going to, you know, we're going to manage this for preservation, and we're not going to manage it for timber production. We're not necessarily going to manage it for watershed management. You know, we're going for old growth timber, and that's what we want. And if that means that we have to limit the number of people who can tramp through it or whatever, we will do it. And if it's, say, if it's bad weather, we're going to shut it down, and we're not going to let anybody in, you know, because this is preservation. Now, conservation, I'm going back here, back about a century, but conservation, the best way I would describe it is wise use. So that means we've got a resource, we're going to use it. We're going to use it carefully because we want to be able to use it 100 years from now. But we're going to use it. We're not just going to preserve it. So that means we're going to run cattle on it, we're going to grow crops on it, or we're going to harvest timber on it, but we're going to try to do it in a way that is, quote, sustainable. You know, whatever, that's another can of worms, but that's how I would describe it. But as my discussion during the talk is, I think the fact that NRCS is going to be on this atlas, they're going to have the chance to, in effect, say, yeah, this is the stuff. These are the programs that we have that represent conservation for farmland and ranch land. And I suspect they're not going to start. They're not going to stop with wetland reserve and CRP. I would say riparian buffers should really be on there. And if they're permanent buffers, no question they would be on there. Temporary buffers, you know, that's not sure how they might handle that. And then anything that improves the rate of carbon sequestration, if that means cover crops or no-till or whatever, I would throw that in as well. I think that's going to be part of the discussion. Where they end up on it, you know, your guess is probably as good as mine. I honestly think to get to 30%, they're not going to be looking at, you know, what ag land do we need to do this? They're going to be looking at, okay, to round out some habitat, you know, what 1 or 2% can we pick up to kind of top this off, so that we have some habitat gains as well as all this other land that we found out was conserved, that just because we hadn't counted it as being conserved up to now.
Good. Another question here. It says, excellent presentation. Where is the land grab narrative coming from then? Well,
the report said, and this is all on the people that wrote the report, you know, they're the ones that said 12%. And, you know, they didn't really say that that's just, you know, that's just an initial number. There is probably a lot higher than that, but we haven't done the detailed assessment that we would do in the atlas to confirm whether it's more than 12%. This is just the 12% that we know that we have right now. They didn't say that. They said 12%, stop, end of story. And so it's very easy for people who were worried about this or who wanted to poke holes in 3030s because they don't like the Biden administration or whatever, political reasons, to say, wow, they're saying they need over 400 million acres. That's twice the size of Texas. Where is all that land going to come from? And, we're in a highly political time. We're divided almost straight down the middle on just about every political question that we have. And so it's not unsurprising that political operatives are going to take the opportunity to say, okay, yeah, this is how we can make 3030 look bad. So let's go for it.
Going back to the previous question, Dave, got a follow-up there. Based on your definition of conservation, wouldn't most, if not all, agricultural land be considered conserved today?
Well, I think you could make an argument for that. I'm not sure that I'd want to know more about it before I would say yes, but I think that there's a fair amount of ag land that is conserved and is being managed for the next 100 years instead of, for the next several years. And, but I have no idea how much that is, what percentage that is, whether that's 10%, whether it's 80%, I don't know.
All right. Can Dave restate which agency is responsible for putting together the conservation atlas? Also, what is the best source for identifying lands in the various gaps?
Okay. The three main agencies are the Interior Department, the USGS, which represents the Interior Department, Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is USDA, and then National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is the Commerce Department, and which deals with coastal zone issues. So, they're the water bunch, and that's all the offshore, coastal stuff. The land agencies are basically USGS from Interior and NRCS from USDA. So, NRCS has a major role. They're one of the lead agencies on the atlas. And if the thrust of the program is to say we're not going to count all these ag conservation programs as conservation, they would not put NRCS as being one of the three lead agencies. They'd put a wildlife agency in there or something like that. So, I think that's a telling appointment. Now, where do you get more information? If you have anybody who is a student, say a student at the university, have them take a class in geological information systems. Our School of Natural Resources teaches them. And maybe after they teach this class, then they can go and you can get into this PAD-US database and query it to your heart's content. Otherwise, and I know that's a very unsatisfactory answer, but I have been feeling very unsatisfactory all throughout this process because these guys are interested in building their database and not very interested in telling what the database tells them, and which shows that they're database nerds rather than public information officers and interested in getting information out to the public. But hopefully the atlas will be more user friendly. But if we see it, it won't be by Christmas.
All right. So, Dave, when the Biden administration says they are willing to use, quote, all the tools in the toolbox, unquote, for 30 by 30, what does this mean?
Well, they have some agencies, not USDA, but, Fish and Wildlife Service has limited authority to purchase property. Some of these, that's one that comes to mind. But they've got, we have all the conservation programs in USDA, especially CRP, and the wetland one, and these other programs. If they got more funding, they could, and they had the acreage limits raised, they could go out and try to sign up more acres into those programs. And so that's what it means to me. We have to keep an eye on carbon smart agriculture. If USDA is tasked with developing a carbon bank, that will open up a whole new program, whether they run it as a separate program or they run it as an add-on to some of their existing programs, that remains to be seen. But I think a carbon bank is, it's passed the Senate. And so if it's going to be tougher getting it through the House, because there's a lot of Democrats who do not like the whole carbon offset idea. They want to reduce emissions directly. They don't want to, do it through carbon sequestration of coal plants or carbon sequestration on ag land. They don't want to do it that way. They don't trust it. They want to go after the emissions directly. And so that's going to slow it down. That's going to slow it down in the House, maybe slow it down a lot. But if we get a carbon bank at USDA, that would be a big deal. And that would open, and, since 3030 is a climate program, it's kind of hard to see how you've got land that's sequestering additional carbon, how that's not contributing to 3030 program objectives.
All right, Dave. Well, we got one final comment that came in, not a question, but a comment by one of our viewers, that I was asked to provide input to the White House. Only after input was given did Vilsack rebrand to America the Beautiful. Dave, yeah, any closing comments today?
There's stuff to worry about in 3030. There's stuff that if you pushed it to the max, would justify some of the kind of, the big headlines we've gotten on 3030 in some of the ag media and regular media, over the past couple of months. But I personally believe that we're a lot closer to 30% on the land side. At least I almost think we're at least double what, I think we're at least double the 12%. And, I think I really scratched my head, because it says, are these guys, did they deliberately go out to try to generate a lot of controversy? I can't believe that. I can believe that they, maybe didn't have the time or the resources to dig into all this stuff, the way that I did, to kind of dig some of this stuff out and to give it a little more context. But they clearly could have done it in a way that would have made it a lot harder for people to say, well, they want to take a land area twice the size of Texas off the tax rolls and put it into preservation, and cut off mining, cut off timber, cut off oil and gas, all of that stuff, all those charges that are raised about 3030. It would have been a much more balanced presentation of the issue, and I'm sorry that they didn't take that opportunity. Maybe they didn't have the time to, but it would have been a lot better all the way around, in my opinion, if they had.
All right. Thank you, Dave. And thank you everyone for joining with us today. Recording of the webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can also register for other upcoming webinars. As a reminder, check cap.unl.edu for a schedule of more webinars from the new Center for Agricultural Profitability. Thanks again for joining us and have a great afternoon.